But are you guys gonna have a planeswalker like mechanic in your game? Are there gonna be like heroes?
So
we can talk about this part of it. Yeah, for
we
sure.
talk about Paragons. Yeah, Paragons are super cool to talk about. So Planeswalker, no, not precisely, but in terms of that level of like character development and presenting strong characters in the game, yes.
Okay.
However, how we're doing that is by a system called the Paragon system. Now, because we're talking in a design-oriented fashion, I don't mind talking about influences. The Paragon system was inspired by two brilliant systems from other games, and then we kind of made our own evolution of it, kind of try to push it forward, as we're doing with a lot of stuff in parallel. So if you're familiar with like Magic Commander, or you've ever played Gwent, you might kind of recognize what we're going for with the Paragon system. So Paragons are kind of like the subclasses of each parallel. Each parallel has 3, and when you're creating a deck, the first choice that you'll make in creating that deck is who your Paragon is. Now, each parallel has 3 Paragons. You do not have to open these in packs. You will be unlocking these as an relatively early part of the onboarding process, you know, kind of like tutorial, kind of like your first game sort of stuff. But each parallel will unlock you the 3 Paragons, so they're not paywalled or anything like that. You don't even have to get any packs or grind at all to play with them. And what these are is these are characters who have 2 parts. Now, one of them is a passive part. So this passive is a permanent modification to how your deck plays. It doesn't matter if your Paragon hasn't been played yet or they've been played and killed. This passive is always active. It is a deck passive, and this is things like so I can share, for instance, Markolian have a Paragon called Catherine Lapointe, the Mad General, and her passive is that the second unit you play each turn gets +1/+1. So the idea there is you play a lot of small aggressive units and you're playing units down, and the second one you play each turn gets buffed because you've chosen Catherine as your Paragon, and she is giving you that deck passive. Now, the other part is that Paragons can be played as soon as you have the energy to do so, or whenever you want, as long as you can pay the energy cost. And they are essentially a card. They're like a functional card. So it exists outside of your hand. You do not have to draw it from your deck, etc. And you can play it once you have the energy cost to do so. And they have some pretty crazy effects on the board. They tend to be very we're basically designing all of the Paragons with the idea like the Paragon should be one of the most exciting plays you make in a game of Parallel. Like, when to play your Paragon is such a key decision. There are some where it's like you're going to play your Paragon and win the game if you manage to do it. Then there's some where it's like very modal. It's like, when do I play my Paragon? You know, it's a real like tempo spike that you got to choose when to do. So yes, that's really the core system of parallel deck building is the Paragon system.
It's also important to note that that information is exposed to your opponent too, so they can maybe plan ahead for when you drop or attempt to drop that hammer. So there's a lot of sort of back and forth. Both Connor and I are no strangers to things like poker, and so we like to incorporate as many little mind games into what we build as possible, because we want players to try and outthink each other.
Because there will be some Paragons where you pick that Paragon, you're saying to your opponent, "This is how I'm going to kill you."
Right.
Yeah, there's some very, very exciting ones.
They have the hammer.
So,
and
all about preparing and all about again player agency. It's a huge form of that.
Yeah. So that leads me to, so they'll know what Paragon you have at the beginning, like during like the loading screen or whatever. It'll be like your deck archetype or whatever.
I would imagine that we not so much deck archetype, but your Paragon choice.
Yeah.
I would imagine that we will visually display as part of the matchup graphic in some point. Yes.
Interesting.
That's way down the line.
Sure.
That stuff.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay. And man, there's so many ways to go from that, because that's always the best part. At least in my opinion, that's my favorite part of playing card games. I was always a big green Magic player because I wanted to drop dinosaurs on people, right?
Yep.
So
I mean, there's definitely, if you like big creatures that do some crazy stuff, some of the units in Parallel are probably going to be to your liking. I spoke about this on the community call we had the other day, but I'll restate it because I think it's such an important thing. One of the core tenets of our design process is make things fun and then make them balanced. Like, if you try to make things balanced from the beginning, what you would end up doing is creating a clone of Hearthstone. Because what you'd subconsciously be doing is you would be picking proven designs that are safe and they're boring. Not because they're bad, but because they're just something that you've seen 1,000 times before. And I'm not saying every unit in Parallel is going to be insane. Of course, there are some that serve very functional purposes. There are many that just serve answers to a question when you're building a deck. But we start out making things fun. Like I will say this to Koji, I'll say this to Carson whenever they submit cards. You know, I'll just be like, make it stronger. Just lower the cost, buff the effect, whatever. Make it crazy. We can make it balanced later on. Like,
my favorite days are the days that I get messages from Connor and he's just like, look at this card, you can meme this one. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to read what it does.
Yeah, there's some pretty spicy cards in there. But I just live by the ethos that it is so much easier to make something really interesting acceptable than it is to make something acceptable interesting. So that's the way that we're designing.
That's a great philosophy. Man, the more I talk to you guys, the more excited I get. I hope everyone else in chat feels the same way, because my favorite games are Dota and Twilight Imperium is like my favorite board game, where both of these are just a bunch of unique characters that are completely busted in their own way. And then they're put in a soup and there's some sort of balance that comes out on the back end. I don't know how.
I'm so glad you say that, because do you know one of the main games that is one of my favorite games of all time and one of my most played that in really kind of begun building this ethos of make things interesting first to me is Dota. I'm a huge Dota fan.
It's like the best game of all time in my opinion.
It can make a very, very strong claim for it. Yes. I'm also a StarCraft boy, so to me, StarCraft will always be difficult to beat. But
that'll be up there.
Dota can make a very good claim for that. I don't even want to know how much time I have played in Dota. Thousands and thousands of hours.
Yep, same. We'll move on from that to save our reputations. But
we're now a Dota podcast. Sorry.
Yeah. All right, guys. Switching modes here. Let's talk about Dota. Yeah, but the design philosophy in those games sounds very similar.
Mind, there's actually a really good question in the chat that I think is a good one to answer.
Let's do it. Let's rock it. What do you got?
So Craney said, can you discuss how you would balance after a card is released? I think this is a really important thing to address.
Yeah.
We're not minting stats or abilities on cards, so those are always adjustable by us. Now, I will say that we will do everything we can as a team to buff other things and make like more stuff playable before we tear down a certain card or an archetype. But there will be, being realistic, especially early on, there will be times we have to adjust cards and weaken their power level, and that is something that we're just going to do. We have to do it for game health. If we didn't do it, I mean, anyone here who's played card games, you know, I'm sure you've played in a stale meta. If we could never fix that, it would just be an awful thing to deal with. So yeah, we're not going to mint stats or abilities on cards, and they are subject to change in the game. But like I say, we will do everything we can first to buff other cards and make more stuff playable before we nerf anything. But we will have to at some point. I'm not going to deny that.
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm glad you picked that one out, because that's why the cards have the name and the QR code and the art and no stats on them just yet. It's because they'll be down the line. They'll be connected to either the game will show the stats or the metadata will point somewhere where the stats are shown.
Yeah, so each card currently is minted with the art and a little bit of flavor text, but the actual in-game functions won't be available until later for exactly that purpose. Because I mean I think I was just about to call you Carson. Connor.
I'll allow it.
Yeah, Connor.
Sea dog.
Yeah, we need to be able to balance properly, or else we're gonna get stuck. And especially in a world where NFTs are ultra permanent, we could get really in trouble if we minted all of the abilities on the cards.
And like I say, I do want to reiterate, we are aiming for buffing over nerfing, but like I say, nerfs will, especially in the early days, they will have to happen. And we're not stupid. Like, will nerfing a card affect its secondary market value? Yes, absolutely. Not so much on like the much rarer versions of it, like SE and stuff. Still a bit though, especially in the short term. That is just an unfortunate consequence of card games. That happens in every single card game. Like, if we're not gonna ban cards. I can promise you that much. Like, it's not gonna be like Magic where you spend 240 euros on a playset of Okos and then they get banned 2 weeks later, which happened to one of my friends. Which
Yeah, that's tough.
But, yeah. But yes, I mean, it will make an impact. We're not going to deny that, but we do not directly control the secondary market. At the end of the day, we'll support it, we'll utilize it, but we are not the masters of it for good reason. That's why decentralization is awesome. And yeah, it will impact it, but like I said, we're going to do everything we can to avoid doing it in the first place.